This is Peter Helland with Gus Zuehlke. We put up our little statue of Joseph, Mary, and Jesus. We got that from Jerusalem. Bethlehem, November 16th, 2016. We were right there after Trump had been elected. And this was pretty expensive because it was carved by one of the well-known sculptors, and it's olive wood, and olive wood represents peace. And the last show we're dealing with, blessed are the children of God, for they shall be called peacemakers. Now the Bethlehem story was recently in the readings of the church. Matthew 2:4. And when Herod had gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. And they said unto him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, And thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah. For out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel. And who are the people of God? Israel. That's why the show is called Israel. Jesus in Matthew 2, if you go further, he is referred to by Matthew as Israel. And Jesus is Israel, and we're Israel, because if the only way you can be a child of God is to be in the seed of Abraham, in Christ. So that's why it's said commonly, you must be born again by the Spirit of God, to be a child of God, and then you deserve, and you only deserve, the label Israel. And I contend, I'm not, that when they call the land over there in the Middle East Israel, they're claiming to be the people of God, and now there's competition. They say they're the people of God. We say, and I would say that Moses said, there'll come one after me that you must believe in. And whoever does not believe in him will be cut off. And of course, as Christians, we believe that one coming was the Messiah, Jesus. Okay, and without him, there is no peace. Now, what we're dealing with here, I just came back from the gym, and it's usually quiet in the locker room, but this time they're talking, and I'm hearing things that's like, whoa, I didn't think this was that real, okay? Because today, the House just impeached, I guess they just impeached Trump the second time. So there's a lot of things in the air. And I'm hearing a guy about my age talk to another guy maybe 20 years younger. And they start talking, and the first word is Kamala. And she's a Satanist. And this is like evil, evil, evil being put upon us. And I waited a little bit, and then I challenged them. And basically, I said, this is a challenge for us Christians. The scripture says you cannot curse the ruler of the people. So if perchance Joe Biden is determined by the 25th Amendment to be too senile, or he dies, and Kamala gets in, then that would apply. Because when Paul said you cannot curse the ruler of the people, it was Nero who was in charge, who was considered, symbolically at least, as the worst possible ruler anybody could have over them. Okay? So we're not allowed as Christians to, it says, curse not the king, even in thy thoughts. We're not even allowed, according to the teachings of Christ, to even have a thought of cursing. And in the Hebrew, it means to make light of. Okay? And one of the shows I had, I said, this is going to be really a challenge. Okay, but to bring us kind of to where we want to be, I'm going to show a clip from the show I had right before I went to that march. I went to the march January 6th. And in that clip, I talk about one of the reasons I'm going is to confront this spirit that we need another 1776. And I said, this is going to create havoc there in D.C. if that doesn't come under control. So one of the reasons I went was to be a prayer presence and see if there's anything I can do to contribute to stop that spirit from taking over. Okay? So I go there, and I just happened to come across Alex Jones with 40 people with him, just walking down the middle of the street, and he's got his bodyguards and he's got his bullhorn. And at first I had no sound. I thought, well, I got no sound, and so I don't really know. I can't remember what he said. Well, what he kept saying was, we need another 1776, and he's going through the streets stirring people up. And then another guy, might not have been him, another guy with his bullhorn said, it's 1984 and 1776 is the only solution. Okay? And then I have a clip where this guy, they're interviewing the fella, and he said, if you take a civics class, we know what this is. The Constitution says that's our house. We're the government kind of thing. And you're finding on the news all these ex-military people, Navy SEALs, they were all in that Capitol building. And thinking it's that they have a right to be there. Some felt that girl that got killed thought it was her duty to be there. And 80% of the people at that meeting, several people concluded, I don't know why we came on 80, how do you know, but 80% seemed to be Christian. But they all held to this notion of 1776, that this is our government, not theirs, okay? The power is with the people, not them. And so what I thought I want to talk with you on is, how did we what's the theology? What's the history of the theology that can help us tone down this that spirit that, like the fellow in the locker room I'm talking, I said, well, do you think there's going to be a civil war? I can't remember exactly what I said. He said, we're in a civil war now. And people are inflamed. Okay, it looks like. And how do we, as peacemakers, as children of God, peacemakers, because it looks like both sides are so separated you can't even talk. Like there's no agreement at any point.
Yeah, and what we want to do is possibly present some ideas where we can build a bridge from one side to the other so that we can walk across the bridge and talk to each other in our common humanity rather than casting aspersions on each other like we hear constantly. The weaponization of rhetoric, okay? Admittedly, I have friends on both sides of this divide, and they're both groups of people I can attest to on both sides of the divide that I'm familiar with are both really good Christians. We're not talking here about somehow one side is better at Christianity than the other. I'm talking about my local friends. My local friends here, there are some who are very strong supporters of Biden, and others are very strong supporters of Trump.
Right, but they both sides, and probably more the Trump people, because that's why they're saying that Kamala is a Satanist. Or I don't know if but let's hear their argument. Their argument is, and I was a follower of Richard Wurmbrand. I used to get his newsletter, Voice to the Communist World or something. Then it became Voice of the Martyrs. Back in the 70s, back 1974, I'm getting his newsletter. And he was 14 years in solitary confinement in Romania. And then he came over here. But I got his booklet in the 70s. Was Karl Marx a Satanist? And his conclusion, of course, that he was. So when you have people boldly saying, I'm a Marxist, you can connect the dots logically and say that, okay? Well, I'm just saying that's their position. And so that means
that could be weaponized rhetoric.
Can a Marxist be a Christian?
Yeah. In certain situations, you have Christian
Marx, Karl Marx was a Satanist. According to Richard Wurmbrand, how can a Marxist be a Christian?
Well,
I'm just saying, here's the conflict.
Yeah.
You're saying, well, I have good Christian friends that are on the other side.
I do.
That's precisely the argument. The other side saying that's impossible that they're Christians. But now, can the other side say it's impossible for a so-called Trump supporter? In other words, when I was down there, I was not down there as a Trump supporter. I didn't wear anything Trump.
Okay.
I was down there to combat that spirit of 76, number one, and to have a prayer presence, and to see if by even being there, that can we get the evidence out? Will they sincerely look at the evidence? Okay, and maybe thinking about that, you had mentioned, maybe we can go back to the evidence class when we were in George Anastapolo's evidence class. Can we?
Right. Well, you have to contextualize that. You got to kind of tell what you're talking about.
Yeah, we'll see if you can.
George Anastapolo is my friend. He was the Socrates of Chicago. He's a well-known public intellectual from the University of Chicago. He taught law at the Loyola Law School for many years.
Now, when you say he's the Socrates of Chicago, did many people claim that?
Yeah, no.
Or was he actually?
They considered him, because of his Greek background and his mastery of philosophy. He's part of the Committee on Social Thought. He graduated #1 in his law class in 1951 with Ramsey Clark, who later became the Attorney General for Kennedy and then Johnson, and Robert Bork underneath him in the law class. He was #1 in that law class with those two famous jurists, really.
So the University of Chicago and people in the know in Chicago,
okay,
they recognized him as one of the leading thinkers in the city.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And they called him the Socrates of Chicago. And of course, he was friends with my parents and me from his classes he taught in the summer up in Wisconsin, up in Door County, and that's how we met him. But anyway, he has a famous law case connected to him. He graduated with these honors, and everyone knew that he was going to go for a really wonderful and lucrative law career. And he surprised everybody, because when they tested his character and fitness, this is in 1951. This is at the peak of what they call now the McCarthy era, the era when there was a lot of concern about communism publicly in the public square, especially triggered by Joe McCarthy, who happens to be from the same city I'm from. Okay, so this is kind of the funny way politics works in my family history. We had friends on both sides. We were friends with George Anastapolo. My dad was friends with Joe McCarthy. So what do you do with that? I mean, so what happened with George, to get back to what happened to him, he graduates, and in those days, in order to join the bar, in order to cross the bar into the Illinois bar, you had to answer some questions. And they asked George if he was a communist. And he refused to answer the question on principle. Now, George wasn't a communist, not by any means. But he refused to answer the question, and he took the case all the way to the Supreme Court. And he lost the case 5-4 in 1961, and he never crossed the bar. And this shocked people in Chicago. Even as of late, like in the early 2000s, I was on a trip and I met some people from Chicago who knew George, and these were fairly wealthy people. And this lady said, we always wondered why he did that, because he gave up so much money, you know. But George was a man of principle, and if he saw a reason to do what he did, that's what he did. And he stood on that grounds. Years later, they tried to let him become a lawyer, and he turned it down. Anyway, instead of being a lawyer, he became a poor teacher. I mean, a lecturer in the liberal arts at the University of Chicago, and he was in the Committee for Social Thought, and he knew Yves Simon, and he knew some of the great philosophers of the day there, Mortimer Adler, those people. And he was part of that group, Alan Bloom. He knew all those people, okay? Well, time goes on, and I make a trip into Chicago because I'm really concerned about the healthcare mandate. If you remember that,
oh yeah,
during the
because of the allowing for abortion or contraception or whatever.
Right, and I was eager to hear what George had to say about it. And because I didn't like to drive alone into Chicago, I asked you to come with me. And that was the reason. You just were kind of accidentally there as my assistant driver, as you remember. And of course, whenever you and I drive places, you bring your books, and you had a bunch of your books so that you could read when I was seeking out George Anastapolo to talk to him. And of course, as you know, I sought him out, and we met with him there at the University of Chicago. And I brought up this problem that was just bothering me. And this was like 3 or 4 months before Roberts made the decision. And what was amazing is George completely outlined exactly what the Supreme Court was going to do with that thing, like 3 or 4 months before it happened. So this guy was an astute legal thinker. And I was just like, oh, it looks like the church is going to lose this deal. I was thinking about the Catholic hospitals and so on. I was just troubled by it, you know. It was just, and I realized that that they were going to lose that deal at that point. Now later on they made an appeal, and there was another overturning of part of that deal later. But at that point, it was going to go in the direction of the healthcare mandate, okay, as you remember. Mm-hmm. And he nailed it. He just explained it the way Roberts was going to solve it. Well, I was done. I had nothing more to say. I was discouraged. And now, how did you enter into this?
Well, did I say? I said.
You said. Wait.
I said no. We're not defeated yet, Gus.
Yeah, I think that's what you said.
And I grabbed that.
He grabbed one of his books
by Griffin,
by David Ray Griffin on 9/11, and he showed it to George.
I said, "What about this?
What about this, George?" And George looked at the book and he said, "Who published this? What publisher is this?" And he started into questioning you about the whole matter.
Like I was really a big troublemaker.
Yeah.
Who is this guy you got with you doing this?
Basically.
Yeah.
So I realize this seems far afield, but it's not at all. Because what happened over time is that George initiated a conversation with both of us, different levels, asking us about 9/11, what we had read about 9/11.
I mean, after he first rejected it totally, he wrote articles. He wrote articles defending the official story.
Well, he had written stuff about it, and he sure didn't. What he said the first time that night, how are things on the fringe, guys? I mean, and then he ran into me at Notre Dame. And he after his lecture at Notre Dame, he pulled me aside on the quad there alone. And he said, "Just what are you doing thinking this stuff?" And I said, "George, I'm really sorry, George. I was actually apologetic. He was my teacher." And I said, "But I just, I've looked at the evidence that I can see, and I can't deny what I can see, George." And that's what I said. And he just shook his head like I was lost. And then we, time went on, and he invited me to one of his classes where he was going to talk about income disparity, right? Mm-hmm. at Loyola University at his law class. And you and I came, and we got there late because we were getting a parking place.
Yeah.
And toward the end of the class, he announced to the class, "This is Gus Zuehlke. His father was a champion and friend of Joe McCarthy's. He's a Catholic. He teaches in a Catholic church, and he believes in 9/11 truth." And this is in front of a group of young law students at Loyola, and I'm sort of like, "George, what are you doing?" I mean, that's what I said. I said, you just put 3 marks on me here, you know, connecting my family and my family history with Joe McCarthy, 9/11 truth. And then he said, "And Gus and his friend are coming back for my class on evidence, and they're going to present to you 9/11 truth."
We didn't know that.
We didn't know that.
Or I thought he asked us.
Well, he had mentioned it.
Okay.
But it wasn't like,
I thought he said, would we do it?
Would we do it? And we said in principle we would, but I didn't think he was going to announce it to the whole class with everybody there. I guess that's the point. Yeah, we talked about it with him. That's true. He didn't just totally spring it on them, but I was still surprised. And I was surprised how I was announced.
Okay, well, he did like an 180. He was going to crucify you for even thinking outside the official story of 9/11.
And then
now it's like, whoa.
And then the next thing you know, you and I are invited to actually give a 2-hour, roughly 2-hour presentation.
The class was 2 hours, so
right. Well,
a lot of it was question and answer.
Yeah, so we gave about an hour presentation on the truth about 9/11, and then we had questions and answers.
The video, using just stuff off the internet, basically.
Yeah, we used it off YouTube.
Yeah.
There was stuff on there. And it was his last class on earth, his last law class. So Peter and I actually...
We didn't know he was dying of cancer directly, did we?
Yeah, we did. I did.
I didn't. Okay.
Okay, you didn't. No, because it was private.
Yeah.
I couldn't reveal anything.
I didn't know it.
That's right. But I knew it. And
he's about how old?
He was about 86.
Yeah.
But he's still teaching, still alert. And so we have this moment with teaching. We present the class on evidence, and we drive back to his house. And I remember driving back with you and him in the car. And
well, how about that question in the classroom?
What question? Which one?
That I said, "I'm a Christian, George."
I'm sorry, that's why. Forgive me. You get me carried away. The key thing about that class in reference to this topic is at one point Peter was talking about George's case with the Illinois Bar and the Supreme Court.
My goal was to somewhat honor him. You know,
he was honoring and George had a big smile on his face when Peter mentioned the case, and Peter said, "Look, in that case, George Anastapolo argues that there's a right to revolution, and that was part of the reason he refused to answer the question, are you a communist or not?" And Peter immediately said, I understand that Professor Anastapolo argued that way for the right to revolution, but as a Christian, I don't believe in the right to revolution. Christians do not foment revolutions. That's how you put it, if I remember correctly.
Because I had studied this matter, as you know.
Yes.
With the Thomas Paine.
Yes.
And even 20 years ago, like with the public access. When I started out, I was putting David Barton's, we're a Christian country. We're a Christian, all the founders were Christian. Well, then I look closer and I go, hold it here. There was a lot of Masons. And then I looked at it and I concluded to myself, I said, that was not justified, that revolution. Meaning it was a crime. That's how I felt. It was criminal.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's a radical...
I came to that conclusion. Now, not many people believe that.
Yeah,
but like 9/11, if you don't look at it close, you may go with the official story. or the evidence if there was fraud or not. Well, they're not even allowing us to look at the evidence in a sense. Okay? But you have to look, the Christian has to look at things very carefully, whether it's scripture or anything, right?
Right. And of course, that's what we were arguing to George on his last law class about 9/11. It was a very poignant moment in my life.
They had the dean of the law school in
The dean of the law school was there, the dean of Loyola Law School, the George's official biographer was there, she was there, and of course we were there, and then all the students. And that was his last law class.
And he allowed us to give it.
And he said...
The whole class.
And the Socrates of Chicago turned his whole class over to two non-lawyers. Both of us are anything but lawyers, actually.
But he admired our search for evidence.
Right. That's the guy had to be the only reason he allowed it.
Right. That we had a real desire for truth.
Right.
And initially he thought we were on the fringe, like no truth with it.
Right.
And obviously he changed his mind.
Right.
And he said, wow, these guys are onto something. In fact, he didn't say it, but he inferred it, that we were right. The evidence was overwhelming. Okay.
Right.
And he didn't want to believe that.
No. And so this is a kind of surprise moment in my life. I mean, but it's very important to realize that he had a tremendous impact on my life as a young teenager. I mean, he gave me his book, The Constitutionalist, great big thick book with notes and everything on the First Amendment.
No, you were how old when you first started?
When you
first knew him?
First knew him at 12 years old. And then at 14, I think he gave me that book, and he wrote something in Greek, and he said, to Gus Zuehlke Jr., some notes on moderation, the importance of moderation among constitutionalists, George Anastapolo. And I gave that book to a lawyer friend of mine, and I haven't gotten it back. Isn't that awful? Mm-hmm. The lawyer, God love him. We'll forgive him for that. But I missed that book. He had this stuff in Greek and all that. But he did give me his book on Lincoln, and he years later, and he inscribed that to me, to Gus Zuehlke, a fellow student of the American regime, George Anastapolo.
Of the American regime.
Absolutely.
That's how he described it?
That's how he described it. And I was just like, how in the world could I be ranked, even mentioned that way by George Anastapolo? Because, I've not spent time in constitutional law or in history or in anything. I've just been teaching religion most of my life, Catholic religion. I'm a parish worker. I'm a church worker.
But
he wanted me to know things about the American regime, and I would hope that I have kept up to some extent with it.
So he wouldn't have agreed, though, with Bradford.
Oh, he debated Mel Bradford.
Oh, he did?
And defended Lincoln against Mel Bradford. Yeah.
Bradford, who said we honor the name of Lincoln at our peril.
Right, he debated.
And then lost the job.
Yes. Oh, yeah, he was named Secretary of Education by Reagan.
No, I thought it was
he was
National Endowment of the Arts.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
That was Bennett. That was Bennett.
No, Bennett was named after Bradford.
Oh, was it?
That's what happened. They named Bradford, and they found out what he said about Lincoln, and they withdrew his name.
New York papers put it in there.
And they withdrew his name, and they put in Bill Bennett.
Because he said, because he wrote at one time, we honor the name of Lincoln at our peril.
Right.
And George took him on that.
George took him on that. George was from Illinois, and he defended Lincoln, and he wrote books on Lincoln.
Look at Illinois and Chicago. They honored the name of Lincoln, and look where they're at.
Well, that's your judgment.
Okay.
I mean, come on. I got a lot of good friends in Illinois, too. Peter, don't get so picky about these things.
Okay. Now, okay. So I think we're going to show those clips. Okay. We'll show those clips. I'm doing the show. We'll show a little clip from the show before I went there. We'll show a minute clip from this guy summarizing, and then we'll do the clip with Alex Jones. I'm estimating it would be about 5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Tomorrow I am going on my third March for Trump event in Washington, D.C. When I go to the March for Trump, they call it, Stop the Steal. The theme is we need to get back to 1776. That's what we need to do. Well, what happened in 1776? We know the commandments are, thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not steal. Did the people following George Washington and John Adams and Samuel Adams and Benjamin Franklin, did they covet those 13 colonies? And after coveting them, did they steal them? Did they not come out, did the Boston Tea Party, did it not come out of the Masonic Lodge? Wasn't that a criminal act? And the British were responding to a crime? And the Americans totally would not repent. And they set up a constitution, which the first time in the world, a government does not acknowledge a deity. No acknowledgement of God in the Constitution. We, the people, ordain this Constitution, and authority comes from the people, from the consent of the governed. And what are they saying in Washington, D.C.? What's one of the themes? We got to restore power back to the people. They're not representing the people. Well, aren't people in authority supposed to represent God? Didn't it used to be that people studied Christian politics? And after the Civil War, it became political science. God is removed. Unless this country acknowledges Jesus Christ, unless it amends the Constitution, which men have said this, thousands of men, Christian governors, Christian presidents of colleges, Supreme Court justices have said, unless we acknowledge Jesus Christ in our Constitution, there is no hope. Romans 1. Because they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them over to sodomy. But there's a spirit in this country that refuses to acknowledge Jesus Christ.
It's time for the American people to wake back up and take this back and give this back to the people. That's where it belongs. These people don't. In fact, here's the thing that people don't understand. Because we have lost civics in school. The Constitution is a contract from me, the people, to a governor to govern me by my authority and my decisions, the people. We give him that authority to govern me, and that's the contract. He can't overstep that contract, and they have overstepped that contract thinking that they have the right to squash it and do whatever they want to it and rule us instead of govern.
1776 worldwide! The answer to 1984 is 1776! 1776! 1776! 1776! 1776!
The theme I'm trying to push out here is that I anticipated that the problem is that I didn't know that there'd be 80% Christians. I mean, I kind of did, but it became more obvious, okay? But they all, in my mind, held to a theology opposite of Fletcher's, okay? With Price and Evans, that was the big battle in England, battling it with Fletcher and Wesley. They held that government is a creature of the people, that authority...
Who did? Price and
Evans. This is 1775, 76, when they're fighting this theological idea out. And that was a revolutionary idea. Up till that point, it was just assumed government was a creature of God, and that authority, whether it was the king or whoever, derived his authority from God, in Jesus Christ, of course. And we are the experiment, the revolution was a theological revolution, that we shifted that, first time any Christian country had ever done it. And we said, no, authority comes from the people. And therefore that translates, authority comes from the consent of the people, which gives, it turns and Fletcher and Wesley, it turns everything on the head. The husband-wife relationship will be turned on its head. The master-slave relationship will be turned on its head. Guaranteed. And not only that, they predicted the whole world will be sucked into this. It'll remove all authority in the world. All subordination in the world will be removed if it's successful. They saw it, and that's what we see even today. So the idea that government's ordained of God and what that all means is foreign to an American Christian. It's foreign.
Well, it's not really foreign to Christianity.
On a practical basis, if you're saying, well, we believe in the representative, what do they call it? Representative democracy, or this is a battle over representative democracy. That who's ever in office is supposed to represent the people. It doesn't matter if you're listening to the oligarchs, or you're listening to the common people. It's the same thing. It's still the voice of Eve. It's still the voice of the devil in Eve. Okay, the devil can penetrate. Well, let me get my point. The devil can penetrate into the voice of the people because that's what he did to Eve. So when Adam was listening to Eve, he was listening to Satan because Satan had put his voice and his teaching into Eve. So the voice of the people is Eve and then Satan. And now these people are saying, and I'm not going to say it, okay? I'll say this, I fear this could be it. But I'm not going to take their position that Kamala Harris is a Satanist. I'm not taking that position, but I'm listening to what's being said, okay? But it makes sense. Once you have representative government, meaning the voice of the people, and we look at Eve and we saw Satan there, where's this headed? You've eliminated Christian politics where the representative studies. How do I serve God in this position? That's what it used to be.
Yeah, and there's still a lot of people who seek to serve God with their authority.
Not really.
Oh, yes.
They all say you work for, the people say you work for us.
Well,
and you're supposed to do what we tell you.
Well, yeah, but they also have, they've been given direct authority.
Not constitutionally, the Constitution does not acknowledge God. So there's no pressure from the legal system that, in fact, Texas versus Lawrence, 2005.
Yeah, well, what about their oath of office where they swear on the Bible? Or
that has as much meaning as when we put on our dollar bill, "In God we trust." Okay?
Is that what you think about the oath?
We tell the whole world, all over the world, people had dollar bills, $10 bills. They all say, "In God we trust." Is that what America does? Everything America does, it's filtered through God. In God we trust. In God we believe. We function, only through Him. Is that who we really are, or are we lying?
Yeah. Well, I'm talking now about the oath of office, though. Like,
I don't think. No, the oaths are gone. The Indiana Supreme Court got rid of the oath.
Okay.
About 15 years ago. It's gone.
Okay.
Daniel Webster argued that the whole basis of the court system is the oath.
Right.
That if somebody suspects that you don't believe you'll go to hell for lying, this is how it was. This is totally lost on Americans now. If the lawyer could prove, who's ever on the stand, did not believe he'd go to hell for lying, his witness was disfranchised. It's meaningless. It's assumed he's lying. You don't believe you're going to go to hell for lying? Of course you're going to lie if it's to your advantage because you don't even believe it. You're disfranchised. You can't believe that witness. That oath, that concept is out of the courthouse. Everybody's a liar. Everybody is lying in one way or another. That's why nobody trusts anybody. Everybody has found a cute way of lying and looking like they're not.
That's pretty radical.
Okay?
Come on.
The Congress has a favored rating. How much do people trust the Congress? 15%? Only 15% has any faith in the people in Congress. Can a country survive with that?
Well, hard to say.
They say Trump was, I heard his ratings going up.
Really?
That's what I heard in one report. Now I hear it's down to 33.
Oh.
One was 46, 33. He's a lot better than Congress.
Okay. Oh, well, okay.
So
But
well,
you don't want to govern by polls either, though.
No. But let's get back. You mentioned the oath, and I just threw that in. So
Okay, I'm trying to look for something to build the bridge here. I
well,
mean,
we're trying to build a bridge, and we were going to go with the whole idea of Joe Bach that we learned from him in the Middle East, that you're not going to achieve any any progress in discussions unless you figure out where people's theology is and try to know where they're coming from.
right.
But here's the problem. If 80% of those people at the Trump march were Christian and they're trying to sit down and talk with the Democrats, what are 80% of the Democrats? What is their theology? How do you then come alongside them and see how they read Scripture? Is that where you get your worldview from?
Okay.
You see, that's a huge problem. Nobody can figure out where they are coming from.
Okay.
In the Middle East, you had the Muslim faith versus the Jewish and the Christian, and you could say, oh, here's how you see it from a Muslim. But the Democrats, does anybody know? See, at that march, all you saw were we believe in Jesus as king and Trump as our president. So you could locate 80% of them really clear. How do you locate the 80% of the Democrats? Coming alongside them, trying to listen, okay, let me see where we agree.
Right. Well, I'd say the Democrats that I've talked to are really concerned about the dignity of people. They're concerned about certain social justice questions. They're concerned about.
But these are such vague terms. How do you? Because my understanding of that is that they think, therefore, we should have same-sex marriage. Therefore, anybody that makes light of a homosexual, that should be a law against that. That's hate speech. Okay, that's what they mean. But the Christian has a duty to rebuke sin, and if he fails to rebuke sin, he's risking his salvation. If you don't warn the wicked, their blood's on you. But they're not allowing that. You can't say anything because it's a matter of social justice and human dignity.
Right. No, but I'm trying to look for a bridge.
I know it. Have you found one?
I think I found one in Catholic teaching.
Okay. Do we need to even go back to see where America, where did they arrive at this belief of the right of revolution, which I talked on the show before. It comes from John Knox, not from John Calvin.
Right.
If you read Calvin, he's totally did not. You could not. That was Fletcher. He quotes Calvin. He said, "Look at your own teacher," because all 13 colonies, from what I know, were basically Calvinists. And he said, "Look at your own teacher." He said he put this in there for a reason. It's impossible you guys could do what you did and be in harmony with your own teacher's teaching on the right of rebellion.
Well, I mean, you could argue with modern people that if they push revolution, they're going against what the Beatles taught in their song Revolution. Remember that? You say you want a revolution. Well, we all want to change the world. You say you want a revolution. Remember that song?
Yeah, well, that's what all people were talking about.
Right.
Get ready for
if you go carrying pictures of Chairman Mao,
which they did,
you won't make it with anyone anyhow. If you want money for people with minds that hate, all I got to tell you is, brother, you have to wait. So even the Beatles were
ready for that.
Were pushing an anti-revolutionary agenda with their song. Okay, so it was still in the consciousness, the mainstream of America in our own experience, not to be rushing off to revolution.
But hold it here.
Hold it.
Mike Jones said on the last show that Aquinas said there is a right to revolution. It's George Anastapolo are saying the same thing.
No, they're not.
Well,
not exactly.
He said we have the right to revolution. Aquinas says we have the right to revolution.
Aquinas, in some very carefully.
He said we have the right to revolution. That's it. Once you say it, it's there.
Okay,
and that's all people are going to walk away with.
You have a duty to oppose massive tyranny.
Over here.
But you don't. The church doesn't demand.
You can't say the word tyranny without defining it precisely. Are you willing to define it? It's easy to use the word all over the place.
Well, I'm just using the word because that's what's in Aquinas. Now, right?
Does he define tyranny?
Yeah, and
People use the word without it ever being defined, and it becomes just a waste of time talking.
okay. Well, the bottom line on that is that a tyrant is a person who ignores God's law in the way that they govern.
There you go. There you go. And what did we do? We created a constitution that totally ignores God. So see, there's the point. John Knox Witherspoon, who tutored over 100 of the founding fathers, James Madison, for a year, one-on-one, from what I imagine, and John Adams and Witherspoon got in Thomas Jefferson's face and said, King George is not a tyrant. He's not operating outside the law of God. Period. Jefferson changed the definition
Okay.
of tyranny, but you just said it. Say it again.
A tyrant is a person who governs without proper reference to the law of God.
Right. So the supreme law of the land in America does not reference God one bit. We are the ultimate tyranny. We are tyranny off the charts because we don't even reference God in the Constitution, the supreme law of the land, which after Lincoln rules over all the state constitutions. And look where we're at. We're authorizing sodomy, and in response, God may be raising up somebody like Kamala Harris, like Nebuchadnezzar, to rule over us. Why? Because of our unbelievable sins of not acknowledging God in the Constitution and the unbelievable sin of taking that all the way to promoting sodomy. And God saying, I've had enough. I'm going to raise up a Nebuchadnezzar to rule over you. And of course, they tried to rebel, right? Oh, the prophet said, we're not going to submit to this.
But Jeremiah said, submit.
This is because this is God's punishment on you. Don't you understand it? Think. So if Kamala Harris rules over us, who's going to argue that it's not God's punishment? How dare they even try it? You're going to argue it's not God's punishment? Go ahead and rebel then and see what happens. You see my point?
Yeah, I see your point. It's pretty dark.
Well, deal with your sins. You need to take your licking. We need about 39 lashes. This country needs 39 lashes. Kaboom. That's how people feel. It's like, your turn, get them. Who's next? Well, reject that and go with the prophets that say it's not God's will that Kamala Harris could be in place, even though it says the powers that be. The King James, I think, is better. The powers that be are ordained of God. And those that resist those powers resist the ordinance of God. That's what Jeremiah was saying.
Well, now wait. As citizens, we're allowed to, there's certain levels of resistance that are allowed, and there's certain that aren't.
Right, but you just said Aquinas says you have the right to revolution.
No, Aquinas.
But it's not the same as what Anastapolo was saying.
Absolutely not.
How do we know that? And how do you know that Aquinas' notion that he said, I'm just saying what Aquinas says, we have the right to revolution, and he could always backtrack and say, but of course, under certain conditions.
Yeah, but the conditions that Aquinas lists.
Well, how do you know what did George say? They never got to that point of discussion. He could have argued, well, I argue the same way Aquinas does. We have the right to revolution.
No, but he didn't. I mean.
So maybe he was like John Knox. Because Knox totally went against Calvin. Calvin disassociated himself from his disciple John Knox on what John Knox taught on the right of revolution.
Okay.
Calvin would have been with Aquinas on the right of revolution.
Right.
And Knox went ballistic.
Okay.
And our country takes Knox's notion of the right of revolution.
I see.
Even though they were always called only Calvin, followers of Calvin, But on this one, they wanted to be followers of Knox. Probably because it was Scotland, and Witherspoon was, Scotland wanted to get revenge on England. They weren't going to submit.
Okay.
But I'm just saying, we've inherited almost everybody at that march. We talked to a lot of people, really good Christians, You could tell they really wanted, and I'm sure a lot did, put Christ as the main purpose of their life. But they also brought in John Knox's notion of the right of rebellion.
Well, at least I can address how a Catholic might look at revolution, just so people know that it's not like John Knox.
Well, here's the question. Is anybody willing to take this and then look at the American Revolution and say whether it was justified or not? Nobody wants to do that, do they?
Well, because it can be a kind of exercise in futility intellectually, because we're dealing now with the current situation, and you want to fight a battle back in 1776. So I want to propose another way to go at this.
Okay, before I lose the thought.
Go ahead.
Let me just ask this. The colonists said, "Join us or die," is one of the mottos. It could have been just, join us as a state, but sometimes I think it was individual.
Mm-hmm.
And if the loyalists were caught praying for King George, which they're commanded to, they got in trouble with the Patriots. The Patriots were cursing King George. Now, the scripture says you're not allowed to curse the ruler of the people. If you're not allowed to curse your parents, because you'll be put to death. Not even in your thoughts for a king. Is it possible that cursing the king is an act of insurrection?
Wow, what a question.
Well, I'm just saying, because if Kamala gets in, and I'm all for her, okay? Because if she enforces the biblical command, you cannot make light of, is the Hebrew. You're not allowed to make light of the ruler of the people. And that's biblical. So if anybody's caught making light of Kamala, the punishment very well may be biblically death. Well, if you curse your parents, it's death. How about the ruler of the people? How about if Joe Stalin found out you said something derogatory in one of your letters you sent, and he found it, what was the punishment?
Exile, Siberia, maybe death.
Maybe death, absolutely. How about Hitler? Did he allow it?
Not that I know of.
Right. How about most kings? Most kings in the past, did they allow for people to curse them? Dictators, kings, call them what you want. In the past, go back 6,000 years, did they generally allow it? Or did parents ever generally allow their kids to curse them?
No.
They didn't, did they?
No.
So now we see a pattern here. We allow our kids to curse us all day long with no punishment. Most families do.
Okay.
I'm just saying, you see where this kind of comes in. Because if somebody makes light of Joe Biden or Kamala, is the church condemning this? Has the church been condemning anybody that makes light of who's in positions of power? And I'm guilty. I'm not saying. This is a challenge for me.
Well, what you're laying out the high scriptural ideal, kind of like the sermon.
Well, didn't Jesus do that? If you look at a woman with lust,
and also love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you,
aren't we just
do good to those who
be
treat.
Perfect as your heavenly Father?
Yeah, no, but the measure of perfection is really love. I mean, what we're really trying to say is that, the reason we don't believe in violent revolution is that here's what.
That's a cop-out. That's a cop-out. The Pharisees didn't believe in adultery, okay?
No.
And they stood so perfect. We don't commit adultery. And Jesus went right and said, "You guys are so phony, makes me sick." He said, "Your definition of adultery covers nothing."
Yeah, but
if you have a lust, and so the definition of insurrection has to be, you have to do what Jesus did for everything and say, what's Jesus' definition of insurrection? Curse not the king, no, not even in thy thoughts. Okay? Even a thought of disrespect for those in authority is an act of insurrection. As having a thought of lust toward a woman is adultery. See, we don't want to do that. We pick the ones we like. But now we're dealing with insurrection, which they accused Jesus of. And he wasn't guilty of it. In fact, they found him guilty on that charge.
Okay. It's Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth by St. Pope John the 23rd. This was the document that made peace between Khrushchev and Kennedy after the Cuban Missile Crisis.
1963.
1963.
So it's in the middle of Vatican II?
No, it's at the beginning of Vatican II.
Oh, beginning.
Okay, around that time. But it's John the 23rd's last major letter, encyclical.
And this is going to help us where we're at right now in the country.
Oh, I think so. If people would pay attention. Look, as far as the country goes, I'll just say something about Kennedy's was inspired to give that famous American University address where he said, if we can't make the world safe for our idea of government, at least we can make the world safe for diversity. There are some souls, particularly endowed with generosity, who on finding situations where the requirements of justice are not satisfied or not satisfied in full, feel enkindled with the desire to change the state of things, as if they wish to have recourse to something like a revolution. Now the church says clearly no to revolution. Paragraph 162, it must be borne in mind that to proceed gradually is the law of life in all its expressions. Therefore, in human institutions too, it's not possible to renovate for the better except by working within them gradually. Pius XII proclaimed it this way: salvation and justice are not to be found in revolution, but in evolution through concord. Violence has always achieved only destruction, not construction. The kindling of passions, not their pacification. The accumulation of hate and ruin, not the reconciliation of contending parties. And it has reduced men and parties to the difficult task of rebuilding after sad experience on the ruins of discord. You see, right now, we have to rebuild on the ruins of discord with a sense of Christian nonviolent resistance, reconciliation, and a spirit of concord rebuilding, right? And the problem is that there's so much rhetoric that would, from both sides, that would push us away from this. So what we really need is a non-aligned peace movement.
But you're up against what Anastapolo pointed out in Paine's book, Common Sense, where he quotes Satan in Milton's Paradise Lost: when hatred gets this far, reconciliation becomes impossible.
Right, but it may be impossible for Thomas Paine and for other men, but it's not impossible for God. And God can push in what we call the rectification, which is the right translation of the word justification, like when you're reading about justification in Romans. There's a God wants to move on the whole world to rectify this. Do you believe in redemption? Was the question that John Kennedy asked the peace activists when they came to see him. Now, in a way, they should have been asking him that, right? But at one point, he leans back and says that to them. And indeed, I had a friend who worked for the FBI, and I want to speak in memory of him today, because he said something that I hold on to. Jesus wants to offer it all to the Father. Jesus wants to offer the Democrat and Republican Party to the Father. But are you going to let him? If you get stumbled up on Thomas Paine, it won't work. but Jesus is more powerful than Thomas Paine.
We're going to close here. Peter and Gus on the show Israel.